Welcome my channel. Tonight's story is one of the most heartbreaking and quietly buried truths in American history. This is the true account of an enslaved woman who raised her master's children as her own, sacrificing her youth, her body, and her soul, only for the truth of her life to be revealed when it was far too late. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because uncovering real stories like this requires deep research, checking old records, and digging through history that was never meant to be remembered. She did not arrive in the master's house by choice, nor by ceremony. There was no announcement, no acknowledgement that her life was about to change forever. One morning, she was simply taken from the slave quarters and told she would no longer work the fields. The mistress had fallen ill after childbirth, and the newborn would not stop crying. The household needed someone strong, patient, and quiet. That was how the enslaved woman was chosen, not because of kindness, but because her body and labor were considered useful. From that day forward, her world narrowed to the walls of the big house, and the children who would come to depend on her more than anyone else. At first, her role was practical. She was to feed the infant, rock him through long nights, wash him, and keep him alive while the mistress recovered. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into years. The mistress never fully regained her health, emotionally or physically, and gradually withdrew from the children's care. The master was distant, consumed by business and reputation. Without any formal declaration, the responsibility fell entirely on the enslaved woman. She became the one who woke at every cry, who soothed fevers, who whispered comfort during storms. The children learned her voice before they learned their parents'. She slept on the floor beside their beds, always close enough to hear them breathe. She taught them how to walk, steadying their steps with hands that were rough from labor, but impossibly gentle with them. She sang songs from her own childhood, songs passed down through generations of suffering, and though the words were never written, the children remembered the melodies for the rest of their lives. When they were frightened, they reached for her. When they were hurt, they called her name. In their earliest memories, she was not a servant. She was simply the person who was always there. As the family grew, so did her duties. One child became 2, then 3. She prepared their clothes, bathed them, braided hair, wiped tears, and celebrated small triumphs that no one else noticed. She was there for first words, first steps, and first heartbreaks. And yet, she was never allowed to forget her place. In front of guests, she had to step back, lower her eyes, and remain silent. Affection was something she could give freely, but was never permitted to receive publicly. The children were taught to love her quietly, carefully, as if love itself could be punished. Still, the bond deepened. The children trusted her with their secrets, fears they could not voice to their parents, questions about the world that no one else bothered to answer. She taught them empathy in ways no formal education ever could. She showed them how to be gentle with animals, how to listen, how to recognize pain, even when it was hidden behind silence. In many ways, she raised them not just to survive, but to feel. And that was something the household would never fully understand the cost of. As the children grew older, they began to sense the contradiction of her presence. She was central to their lives, yet invisible in every official sense. She had no authority, no protection, no future promised beyond service. When one child once asked why she never left the house, she smiled softly and changed the subject. She knew the truth would only confuse and hurt them. Loving them meant shielding them from the cruelty that defined her own existence. Years passed, and her body bore the marks of that love. Long nights without rest weakened her health. Carrying children, running between rooms, absorbing stress and fear, all of it took its toll. But she never complained. She believed, perhaps desperately, that if she could raise these children with compassion, some small part of the world might change through them. That hope became her quiet rebellion. By the time the eldest child reached adolescence, the enslaved woman had become woven into the family's identity. Neighbors commented on how well-mannered the children were, how gentle their hearts seemed compared to others of their class. Credit was given to the household, to upbringing, to God, but never to her. She stood nearby when praise was spoken, hearing it all, knowing where it truly belonged, and accepting that no one would ever say it out loud. What no one realized then was that her role in their lives went far beyond care. She had shaped their understanding of love, safety, and humanity. She had been their constant in a world of distance and expectation. And yet, history would not record her name. Documents would list her as property, not parent. The truth of how she became the one who raised the master's children would only surface much later. When it could no longer save her, thank her, or give her back the life she gave away piece by piece. The emotional bond that formed between the enslaved woman and the children she raised was profound, shaped not by titles or law, but by the daily intimacy of care, sacrifice, and constant presence. From the very beginning, she was the first face they saw when they opened their eyes in the morning, and the last warmth they felt before drifting into sleep at night. Her touch soothed their fears, her voice calmed their tears, and her eyes watched over them with vigilance no one else could match. She became more than a caregiver. She became the emotional center of their young lives, the one whose presence made the house feel safe, even when the adults around them were distant or harsh. She remembered every small detail about each child, which blanket they preferred, which lullaby made them sleep faster, which foods they liked or hated, and even the subtle changes in their moods that no one else noticed. It was not just routine. It was a form of deep attention and devotion, almost instinctual, that came from a place of love hardened by necessity. Every small act of care, every gentle correction or soothing whisper, created a bond that was invisible to outsiders, but tangible to the children themselves. To them, she was not a servant. She was a protector, a teacher, a constant presence in a world they were only beginning to understand. Her influence extended far beyond practical care. She guided them through their first encounters with fear, disappointment, and curiosity. When the eldest scraped a knee, it was her hand that held theirs steady. When the youngest cried at night, it was her gentle humming that brought comfort. She whispered lessons about right and wrong through stories and personal example, lessons about compassion, resilience, and empathy. The children learned from her about the world's hardships and joys long before the master or mistress ever attempted to teach them. The emotional imprint she left on them was indelible, shaping not only their childhood, but the people they would become. This bond was complicated by the realities of her position. She loved them unreservedly, yet she could never openly claim that love. In public, She had to remain deferential and invisible. She could not embrace them freely, nor could she correct them without fear of punishment. Yet her love found subtle expressions, a brush of the hair behind the ear, a quiet reassurance in the dark, a whispered story that made them laugh or dream. The children, even if they didn't fully understand the constraints, felt her care deeply. They came to rely on her as the primary source of comfort and security in a household governed by strict hierarchies and social expectation. As the children grew older, their awareness of the unusual nature of their relationship developed. They noticed her quiet devotion, her tireless attention, and the sacrifices she made that no one else acknowledged. They began to see that she was not merely performing a duty, she was giving her life, day by day, for their well-being. This realization often sparked conflicting emotions, gratitude, admiration, and sometimes confusion or guilt, because they could not change the social and legal structures that kept her bound to servitude. Yet the bond only deepened, forged in the crucible of shared daily life, unspoken care, and a reliance that could not be measured in words. Even when punishment or harsh discipline occurred in the household, she shielded the children from the brunt of it, whenever possible. She would quietly redirect scoldings, soften instructions, or absorb blame herself to protect them. This selflessness further strengthened their dependence on her and created a profound sense of loyalty and trust. In moments of solitude, the children would seek her out, not merely for physical comfort, but for the emotional stability she provided, the assurance that, no matter the turmoil or confusion around them, there was someone in the world who loved them completely, without condition or compromise. Her bond with the children extended into moral and spiritual lessons as well. She taught them about the importance of kindness, fairness, and understanding, often through parables, stories, and her own actions. She showed them how to navigate fear, how to confront injustice, and how to find strength in compassion. Even as they grew to understand the vast inequalities and cruelties of the society they lived in, it was her presence that grounded them, giving them a moral compass that no formal education could provide. By the time the children reached adolescence, it was impossible to imagine their lives without her. She had been the center of their formative years, the quiet architect of their character, and the emotional anchor of their household. While the master and mistress represented authority and expectation, it was she who represented love, security, and moral guidance. The children's hearts were inextricably linked to hers, a bond that transcended the societal constraints imposed on them all. Ultimately, the emotional connection she fostered was both her gift and her sacrifice. She gave so much of herself, her energy, her body, her patience, her heart. Yet the children, though they adored her, were raised in a society that could not legally or socially recognize her role. This tension defined the relationship, love that was deep, enduring, and transformative, but always constrained by the cruel limitations of the world around them. And though history may have overlooked her, the children carried the imprint of that bond throughout their lives, forever shaped by the unwavering devotion of the woman who raised them with love no law could honor. The hidden sacrifices and punishments the enslaved woman endured in silence were unimaginable, yet they were woven into every aspect of her daily existence. From the moment she was assigned the care of the master's children, her life ceased to belong to herself. There was no room for rest, no allowance for illness, no space for personal grief. She worked tirelessly from dawn until long after dusk, managing not only the children's care, but also the endless demands of the household. Meals had to be prepared, clothing washed and mended, rooms cleaned, and yet, every misstep or perceived failure could be met with punishment, not always formal, not always spoken, but always looming. A spilled bottle of milk, a child's tear she could not stop, a missed stitch in clothing. Each could trigger a beating, a verbal reprimand, or a display meant to remind her of her place. Even her health suffered under the relentless demands. Nights spent awake rocking crying infants left her exhausted and weak. Her body bore the physical strain of constant labor, the toll of lifting, bending, scrubbing, and carrying that never ceased. She often went without meals so the children could eat, and she clothed herself in whatever was left. Over time, fatigue became a constant companion, yet she persisted in silence, knowing that any complaint might be interpreted as weakness or defiance. Her sacrifices were invisible, unacknowledged, and, in the eyes of the household, expected, part of her role as property, rather than a human being with needs of her own. The punishments she endured were not always predictable or fair. Discipline could come at the hands of the master, the mistress, or even other members of the household who felt they had authority. Sometimes it was verbal, sharp words, public humiliation, or scolding in front of the children to reinforce hierarchy. Other times it was physical, the sting of a whip or rod for something as minor as spilling food or failing to anticipate the whims of the children. Yet she bore all of it quietly, never allowing the children to witness the full extent of her suffering. She absorbed pain so that they could grow up believing the world was orderly and safe. Every strike, every harsh word, became part of the hidden ledger of her sacrifices, paid in blood, tears, and sleepless nights. Her emotional labor was just as demanding. She was required to be perpetually patient, nurturing, and attentive, even when her body ached, when her heart was heavy, or when she longed for freedom. She could not express anger, fear, or grief, for to do so would have endangered her position and the children's perception of safety. The weight of constant vigilance left her with little time for personal reflection or rest. She was always present, always alert, always anticipating the children's needs, and yet she was never recognized as the architect of their well-being. Each small success in their care came at immense personal cost, and every hardship she endured silently accumulated like layers of invisible scars. The isolation she experienced was profound. Though surrounded by children and adults, she had no true peer, no confidante, no person who could share the burdens she carried. Even within the enslaved community, those tasked with childcare on other plantations did not understand the unique pressures she faced. She was responsible for not just life but character, morality, and emotional development, all under the scrutiny of the family she served. Any lapse could reflect poorly on her, and yet the effort to constantly maintain perfect care demanded total emotional availability, leaving her no outlet for frustration or despair. Despite all this, she continued to give love freely. She comforted the children after nightmares, bandaged scraped knees, taught them lessons of empathy and resilience, and offered guidance and encouragement. She celebrated their successes quietly, rejoicing in their happiness, while knowing her own desires and achievements were irrelevant to those who held power over her. The paradox of her life was that she was both indispensable and invisible, central to the children's development, yet denied acknowledgement. Her suffering and her labor were the foundation upon which their childhood rested, yet history would not record her contributions. Even the small freedoms she might have imagined were denied. A moment of rest was impossible. Visits to her own family were restricted or prevented altogether. She could not tend to her own grief or joy without fear of punishment. Holidays and gatherings that celebrated family and children were bittersweet reminders of what she lacked: autonomy, recognition, and the ability to claim her own life. Her sacrifices were both physical and psychological, a relentless balancing act between protecting the children and preserving whatever dignity she could maintain under the weight of constant oppression. The enormity of her silent suffering also shaped her resilience. She learned to endure without complaint, to perform her duties flawlessly under observation, and to manage her own emotions so that the children could experience a world that appeared safe and nurturing. Every act of patience, every gesture of care, was a conscious decision to absorb hardship for the sake of others. The consequences of any failure, even accidental, could be immediate and harsh. Yet she persisted, creating an environment of stability and love amidst a system that denied her humanity. Ultimately, the hidden sacrifices and punishments she endured in silence were a testament to her extraordinary strength and devotion. She bore the weight of child, rearing, domestic labor, emotional guidance, and moral instruction, all while navigating the constant threat of physical punishment and social invisibility. Her life was a continuous act of courage and selflessness, carried out in quiet, unrecorded labor that shaped generations. It was only long after her death that the magnitude of her sacrifices could be recognized, and even then, history could scarcely convey the full depth of the endurance, love, and pain she bore in raising the Master's children. The secret truth about her past, deliberately concealed from the family she raised, was one of the heaviest burdens she carried. A story that could never be spoken aloud without jeopardizing her safety and her place in the household. Before she was brought into the Master's home, she had endured a childhood of unimaginable hardship, marked by loss, separation, and the cruel realities of enslavement. She had been torn from her own mother at a young age, sold from one plantation to another, and forced to witness the suffering of those closest to her. Each memory became a quiet wound she carried internally, a private pain she could never show to the children who depended on her for comfort. Her past was a tapestry of grief, fear, and resilience, but it was a tapestry hidden beneath the guise of her role as caretaker. In addition to her personal history, she had endured experiences that left her with scars, both physical and emotional. Beatings, punishments, and the constant threat of violence had shaped the way she moved, spoke, and even breathed. She learned early on to anticipate the moods of those around her, to conceal her pain, and to act with a measured calm that belied the turbulence within. These lessons became essential once she entered the household where she was charged with raising the Master's children. Any hint of her history could be misinterpreted as rebellion, disobedience, or a threat to the social order. She had to carry every fragment of her past in silence, storing memories as private talismans, never allowing the children, or anyone else, to glimpse the depth of her own suffering. Her knowledge of loss, survival, and endurance profoundly influenced the way she nurtured the children. She instinctively protected them from the harsh realities of the world, shielding them from harm and teaching them lessons she had learned too late. She carried an understanding of danger, betrayal, and human cruelty that the children could not comprehend. Her wisdom, gained through hardship, was hidden beneath warmth, tenderness, and care. Every lullaby sung, every bandaged knee, and every whispered lesson carried the weight of her personal history, though the children only knew the gentleness, not the gravity, of her guidance. The concealment of her past also extended to her family connections. She rarely spoke of her parents, siblings, or extended kin, because even a simple acknowledgement of family ties could draw suspicion or punishment. Letters, photographs, or tokens from her previous life were dangerous. They could signal a longing for freedom, a desire for reunion, or a willingness to challenge authority. Instead, she wove herself entirely into the lives of the children she cared for, constructing a new identity in service to their survival and development. Her own lineage became a secret she carried silently, locked away to ensure the safety and stability of the household she served. Beyond the personal, there was a larger secret about her own status within the community. Though she was enslaved, she possessed skills, knowledge, and intelligence that could have allowed her to navigate life differently under another set of circumstances. She understood reading, cooking, herbal remedies, and childcare at a level far beyond what was recognized publicly. These abilities, however, had to remain hidden or understated. Drawing attention to her talents could provoke jealousy, fear, or punitive oversight from the master's family or other household staff. Her expertise was quietly exercised, influencing the children's lives profoundly while remaining largely invisible. Her capabilities, known only to those she chose to teach indirectly through actions rather than words. Even in her emotional interactions with the children, the secret of her past created boundaries she could not cross. While she loved them deeply, she had to avoid revealing any vulnerability, fear, or anger, because the consequences could be catastrophic. Every moment of intimacy or discipline was measured against the need to protect herself. Her laughter was tempered, her admonishments soft, her smiles carefully curated. She carried the dual weight of nurturing others while guarding herself, a balancing act informed by her early experiences of trauma and survival. The revelation of her past, when it finally came, illuminated just how much she had given of herself without recognition. By then, the children she had raised were grown, the master's household had shifted, and the world around them had changed. Only then did the full depth of her sacrifices and resilience become clear. The endurance she had shown was not only physical, but also intellectual and emotional, built upon the unspoken knowledge of her own survival against impossible odds. Her history, once concealed, cast her actions in a new light, showing that every act of care, patience, and guidance was rooted in a profound understanding of life's fragility and injustice. The secrecy of her past also shaped the perception of the household and the children once they learned the truth. They began to understand that the woman they had loved and trusted was not merely a caretaker, but a person who had navigated tremendous hardships long before she met them. The knowledge that her life had been filled with trials and dangers that they could barely imagine added layers of admiration, guilt, and gratitude to their understanding of her role. Her past was no longer just a private burden. It became the lens through which her entire existence, and their own upbringing could be fully comprehended. In the end, the hidden truth of her past revealed the magnitude of her strength and devotion. It explained the depth of her patience, the unyielding care she gave, and the sacrifices she made daily. It underscored that her life had always been lived in the shadows, not for herself, but for others. And while the world had kept her history secret for decades, that very concealment had allowed her to protect and nurture the children who came to depend on her so completely, a silent heroism that would only be recognized when it was far too late to repay the debt she had quietly borne. The moment the truth finally emerged, and why it came too late to change her fate, was a revelation both heartbreaking and long overdue. By the time anyone realized the full scope of her sacrifices, the enslaved woman had already lived a lifetime of devotion without acknowledgement. Her health weakened, her body worn from decades of constant labor, and her spirit deeply marked by the burdens she had silently carried. For years, her contributions were assumed to be part of her duty. Her unwavering care and love for the children taken for granted, as though it were expected from someone of her station. Only later, when the children she had raised were grown, successful, and able to reflect on their own upbringing, did the full truth begin to surface, a truth that no amount of remorse could undo. It often came through scattered letters, hushed conversations, and the confessions of household staff who had witnessed her sacrifices in secret. These accounts revealed the extraordinary lengths she had gone to in order to ensure the children's survival, health, and emotional development. She had borne not only the physical labor of cooking, cleaning, and childcare, but also the emotional weight of guiding and shaping the children's character under conditions of strict control and constant oversight. She had done all of this with little recognition, no protection, and often in danger of punishment for the smallest perceived misstep. The revelation of these facts brought admiration and guilt in equal measure to those who had benefited from her labor. But it was a recognition that came too late to compensate her for the decades she had given. By the time her story was uncovered, she had already passed away or was living in the final years of a life spent largely in service to others. The children she had raised could now articulate their gratitude and sorrow, but there was no way to restore her youth, her health, or the autonomy that had been denied to her. The timing of the revelation meant that acknowledgement was symbolic rather than restorative. It could honor her sacrifices in memory, but it could not undo the countless losses she had endured. For them, learning the truth was a bitter mixture of enlightenment and grief, a stark reminder of how much had gone unseen and unappreciated during her lifetime. This delayed recognition also illuminated the societal structures that had allowed her contributions to remain hidden for so long. As an enslaved woman, her role was defined by legal and social constraints that denied her any authority or public acknowledgement. The very system that relied on her labor and devotion simultaneously erased her existence in historical records, official documents, and family histories. Her story was largely invisible until hindsight allowed the grown children, or later historians, to piece together her life and realize the profound influence she had on their lives and the moral shaping of the household. The truth, while powerful, was limited in its ability to affect her directly. The impact of the revelation went beyond personal acknowledgement. It reshaped the children's understanding of their own upbringing and the lives of those around them. They began to recognize patterns of care and protection that had seemed ordinary in their youth, but were, in fact, extraordinary acts of courage and endurance. Simple gestures, like preparing meals carefully, comforting them in the night, teaching lessons about right and wrong, were no longer taken for granted. They were seen as deliberate, intentional, and deeply sacrificial. Every act of love, every ounce of patience, every silent correction became part of a legacy of strength that was only understood fully in retrospect. Even more, the truth forced reflection on the injustice of the system itself. The recognition that such devotion had been required rather than chosen, that her sacrifices had been made under duress and threat, and that her life had been constrained by forces beyond her control brought a new, painful awareness of the moral cost of slavery. The revelation was not just about her individual story, but also about the countless others whose contributions went unnoticed, whose sacrifices were hidden by the same structures that had defined her life. The delayed acknowledgement also had an emotional and psychological impact on the children she had raised. They were filled with gratitude, yes, but also with a profound sense of guilt and regret for the years they had unknowingly benefited from her strength, while failing to recognize it. They mourned not just her sacrifices, but the lost opportunities to express love, to return care for care, and to honor her while she was alive. The realization was agonizing because it revealed how much of her life had been consumed in silent service, and how little could now be done to repay her. Ultimately, the truth revealed the full magnitude of her devotion, courage, and endurance. But it arrived too late to provide her with the recognition or relief she deserved. It became a cautionary tale, highlighting both the human capacity for selfless love and the moral failings of a society that allowed such devotion to remain hidden. Her legacy, though recognized belatedly, became a testament to strength, resilience, and the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed. A reminder that the deepest truths are sometimes only seen when the opportunity to honor them fully has passed. Her story, once finally told, inspired reflection, remorse, and reverence, but it also reinforced a painful reality that some truths, no matter how important, arrive too late to heal the wounds they reveal. Even in death or obscurity, her influence persisted through the children she had shaped, a lasting echo of love, sacrifice, and resilience that would survive long after acknowledgement came, proving that her life, though hidden, had mattered beyond measure.